This Bible study on King Saul tonight, and I'll just use the microphone on the podium here. I won't need the lapel. There'll be two maps to be shown tonight. The first one's the one that we looked at last week, and we are on letter Z in our notes. 1 Samuel 29 is where we're going to be. We're going to look at 29, 30, 31. I've already got all of 2 Samuel outlined and ready to go for King David. So we'll be starting him next Wednesday night. I think it's 6 pages typed. And so I'll be stapling them together and giving it to you like this, so you just tuck it away and bring it back, and we'll just go through 2 Samuel looking at King David. It's interesting, I was reading the Psalms last couple of days, and I'm still in the Psalms. I think I'm on Psalm 67 or something. But it's interesting if you know the background of King Saul and King David, the Psalms make a little bit more sense. And it brings more meaning to it. And I think it's helpful for us to go through these Bible characters that way. So let's quickly take a look at the map that's on the screen here tonight. And if you can you zoom in on the bottom there with all the cities there? All right, great, thank you. So you have several cities down at the bottom left-hand side. Of course, the blue is the Mediterranean Sea. Those are Philistine cities. And you see how there's red arrows. The Philistines are going to be gathering together to go up to a certain town. And if you could move up a little bit more, do you see the town that they're heading to? It's called Aphek. We'll see that here today, how the Philistines are going to gather to Aphek. What's going to happen is David is over there with the Philistines, and one lord, one king, likes David, but the other ones are going to say, David, we don't really trust you. Thanks, but no thanks. Remember, the Israelites and the Philistines are going to go to battle. And the Philistines don't want David on their side to fight against Israel because they may think that he's going to switch sides in the battle. And so that's what's going to happen. And, of course, the red arrow, if we can, again, zoom up a little bit more, the Philistines are going to gather together at Aphek, join all their forces together, and march northward to where the Israelites are at. All right, so letter Z in our notes, the mistrust. The mistrust. Number one, the desire. The desire. Look at 1 Samuel 29, verse number 1. Now the Philistines gathered together all their armies to Aphek, and the Israelites pitched by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And if you look at the red thick arrow, it literally says there, Philistines approach Jezreel. And so they're heading up in that direction. Verse 2, and the lords of the Philistines passed on by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed on in the, and I always mispronounce this, reward. It's in the rears, with Achish. Then said the princes of the Philistines, what do these Hebrews here? Remember, Achish was the guy that is favoring David. David had communion with him, talked to him. I don't mean communion like we do, but he talked with David, and they hit it off. So Achish is allowing David to come fight with them, but the other lords, the princes, they don't like this idea. So they say, Achish said unto the princes of the Philistines, is not this David, the servant of Saul, the king of Israel, which hath been with me these days or these years? And I have found no fault in him since he fell unto me unto this day. So Achish is vouching for David, saying he's okay. He can fight with us. So Achish has a desire for David to come with him. But then we see number 2, the denial. The denial. The Philistine leaders are going to say no. Verse number 4. And the princes of the Philistines were wroth with him. And the princes of the Philistines said to him, Make this fellow return, that he may go again to his place, which thou hast appointed him, and let him not go down with us to battle, lest in the battle he be an adversary to us. For wherewith should he reconcile himself unto his master? Should I not be with the heads of these men? So they're afraid that David's going to have a change of heart and be reconciled to King Saul, and they don't want that to happen, so they'd rather not David join them at all. Verse 5, Is not this David of whom they sang one to another in dances, saying, Saul slew his thousands, David his tens of thousands? That's the princes talking to Achish. Verse 6, Then Achish called David and said to him, Surely, as the Lord liveth, thou hast been upright, and thy going out and thy coming in with me in the host is good in my sight. For I have not found evil in thee, since the day of thy coming unto me, as this day. Nevertheless, the Lord's favor thee not. He says, I'm outruled, outnumbered. I'm sorry, you can't come with us. Verse 7, Wherefore now return and go in peace, and thou displease not the lords of the Philistines. Now, watch what David says. This is interesting. He doesn't ask him to go, but remember the question that David kept asking Saul? Saul, what have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? David is now saying the same thing. David said to Achish, What have I done? What hast thou found in thy servant so long as I have been with thee unto this day, that I might not go fight against the enemies of my lord the king? Achish answered and said to David, I know that thou art good in my sight, as an angel of God. Notwithstanding, the princes of the Philistines have said, He shall not go up with us to the battle. Wherefore now rise up early in the morning with thy master's servants that are come with thee, and as soon as you be up early in the morning and have light, depart. So David and his men rose up early to depart in the morning to return into the land of the Philistines, and the Philistines went up to Jezreel. So looking back at the map, if we can scroll all the way back down a little bit, right there. Do you see where it says David returns? Those blue dotted lines there. He's now returning back down to Ziklag, which is where he came from. All the Philistine people left their towns. David left Ziklag. They all gathered up at Aphek, but David has now been told to return. And it's interesting that David was concerned about his testimony, even with the Philistine king Achish. So there's the mistrust. The people, the Philistines, they mistrusted David, and I don't blame them. Letter AA, double A, all right? David's vengeance. David's vengeance. We'll get to chapter 30 here. Number 1, the sorrow. The sorrow. I think we're going to the second map here. Letter A underneath that, the destruction. The destruction. Now, if we could zoom in on the map down at the bottom, please. There's a couple of different colors here. Can we zoom in a little bit more? If you notice the green arrows, those are the arrows of the Amalekites. The Amalekites are going to go through this whole area and wipe out different people, including Ziklag, that David, his soldiers, family members, they were all in Ziklag. So those Amalekites are going to come through there and go through Ziklag, defeat Ziklag, and capture the women and children and take them POWs. Well, David is going to come back to Ziklag and return and see this destruction. Look at chapter 30, verse 1. And it came to pass, when David and his men were come to Ziklag on the third day, that the Amalekites had invaded the south, and Ziklag, and smitten Ziklag, and burned it with fire, and had taken the women captives that were therein. They slew not any, either great or small, but carried them away, went on their way. So David and his men came to the city, and behold, it was burned with fire, and their wives and their sons and their daughters were taken captives. Now stop there. I want you to put yourself emotionally in the shoes of these soldiers. They're Israelites. Israel doesn't want them. The Philistines don't want them. The only place of refuge and comfort they can go is back to their families in Ziklag, and now they come back to Ziklag, and it's burning. How would you feel? Verse 4. Then David and the people that were with him lifted up their voice and wept until they had no more power to weep. And David's 2 wives were taken captives, Ahinoam, the Jezreelitess, and Abigail, the wife of Nabal the Carmelite. And all that means, again, is Nabal is dead, but Abigail was married to him first. So we see the destruction. Letter B, we see the distress. The distress. The soldiers are now going to turn against David. Look with me at verse 6. And David was greatly distressed. Now, let me pause there. Imagine how you would feel if you were the leader of these men, putting them in this situation. You would feel responsible for having them in this situation, the loss of the 2 wives that David's married to, and the wives of all these soldiers. You would feel guilty. So it's understandable why he is distressed. And besides that, keep reading. For the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. And then it says something at the very end, but David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. And the rest of the chapter tells us how he encourages himself, but here he doesn't have his soldiers that would normally encourage him. He has himself. And he's in a situation where the Israelites don't want him, the Philistines don't want him, his family's gone, his soldiers are now speaking of stoning him, and he turns to God. And praise the Lord that we have that comfort, that place, that person that we can always turn to, even when it seems everything is going wrong. Letter A is the destruction. Letter B is the distress. Letter C is the direction. The direction. Verse 8. Verse 8, David inquired at the Lord. And that's something that we should do, whether we are in a distressful situation or not. But praise the Lord that we can go to the Lord even in difficult times. And this is what he says, saying, shall I pursue after this troop? Shall I overtake them? And he, the Lord, answered him, David, pursue, for thou shalt surely overtake them, the Amalekites. Now watch this. And without fail, recover how much? All. Now that's important, because God just made a promise. And we know something about God is a promise keeper. So he's made David a promise. He says, go ahead, pursue, and you shall recover all. So number 1 was the sorrow. Number 2 is the success. The success. Letter A, we see 200 exhausted men. 200 exhausted men. Chapter 30. Look with me at verse number 9. So David went, he and the 600 men that were with him. And it came to the brook Besor, where those that were left behind stayed. Now, look at the map, and you see the city Ziklag, and you see the Besor, the ravine there, the brook that's there. That's where some of the men are going to stop. He's got 600 total, but some of them are going to stop. They're so tired. Look at verse 10. But David pursued, he and 400 men, For 200 abode behind, which were so faint that they could not go over the brook Besor. All right, so 200 are staying there at Besor, and the other 400 are going on because God said, pursue, and you will recover all. And so everything, all the spoils and their families that they were going to recover, their sons, their daughters, their wives, God said, you'll recover all. And so they did that. So we have 200 exhausted men. Letter B, one Egyptian man. One Egyptian man. So as David and his 400 men are pursuing the Amalekites, they're trying to catch up to the Amalekites, they come across a man who is an Egyptian. He is not doing well health-wise because the Amalekites left him there. He was not healthy, so they said, you're slowing us down. They just left him there. And so David finds this guy and nurses him back to health. Look with me at verse 11. And they found an Egyptian in the field and brought him to David and gave him bread, and he did eat, and they made him drink water. They gave him a piece of a cake of figs and 2 clusters of raisins, and when he had eaten, his spirit came again to him, for he had eaten no bread, nor drunk any water 3 days and 3 nights. And David said to him, to whom belongest thou, and whence art thou? And he said, I am a young man of Egypt, servant to an Amalekite. My master left me, because 3 days agone I fell sick. We made an invasion upon the south of the Cherethites, and upon the coast which belongeth to Judah, upon the south of Caleb, and we burned Ziklag with fire. David said to him, canst thou bring me down to this company? And he, the Egyptian, said, swear unto me by God that thou wilt neither kill me nor deliver me into the hands of my master, and I will bring thee down to this company. So the Egyptian is telling the story to David. Yeah, we were going through this city, and by the way, we burned Ziklag. And David says, yeah, I was from there. Can you take me to these Amalekites? And so they come to an agreement saying, you won't kill me? No. You won't turn me over to my master? No. Okay, I'll show you. And so this Egyptian is now going to show David and his 400 men that are pursuing where the Amalekites are. So now we have, letter C, 400 energized men. 400 energized men. You have 200 exhausted men, 1 Egyptian man, and 400 energized men. Look at verse number 17. And David smote them from the twilight even to the evening of the next day. And there escaped not a man of them, save or except 400 young men, which rode upon camels and fled. David recovered all that the Amalekites had carried away. And David rescued his 2 wives, and there was nothing lacking to them, neither small nor great, neither sons nor daughters, neither spoil nor anything that they had taken to them. David recovered how much? All, because God promised that. And praise the Lord that God keeps his word. Look at verse 20. David took all the flocks and the herds which they drave before those other cattle and said, this is David's spoil. Number 3, the sharing. The sharing. Number 1 was the sorrow. Number 2, the success and the sharing. Well, the 400 people, the soldiers that were the energized, who did the fighting, think that when they get back to the brook, Besor, where the 200 are, that the 200 who did not do any fighting should not share in the spoil. Of course, they can have their wives back, their children back, all that, but all the other stuff that we stole back from the Amalekites and that the Amalekites robbed from all these other cities, the 200 don't deserve it. And so they're going to have this conversation of sharing. All right, so letter A, the soldiers of Israel. And you have number 1, their objection. The soldiers of Israel, their objection. All right, so it's David's spoil. Verse 21, and David came to the 200 men, which were so faint that they could not follow David, whom they had made also to abide at the brook Besor. They went forth to meet David and to meet the people that were with him. And when David came near to the people, he saluted them. So notice he's paying them respect. Then answered all the wicked men and men of Belial, of those that went with David, and said, because they went not with us, we will not give them aught of the spoil that we have recovered, save to every man his wife and to his children, that they may lead them away and depart. So they said, all these 200 are getting are their wives and their children. They don't get anything else. So we see their objection. Number two, we see their ordinance. Their ordinance. David is going to now make an ordinance, a command that says this is the practice that we will not only now follow, but we will always follow. Basically, share and share alike. He's going to say, it doesn't matter if you are a cook on the wagon trail or you are the guy defending against the Indians out there on the plains. If you're doing the fighting or you're doing the cooking, we all share. We're doing the work together. And look at verse 23. Then said David, ye shall not do so, my brethren, with that which the Lord hath given us, who hath preserved us and delivered the company that came against us into our hand. Notice here how David says, anything that we have is by God's grace. God gave us the victory. God gave us the spoils. God gave us this and this. It's God's gift. Verse, I lost my place. Somebody help me. 24. For who will hearken unto you in this matter? But as his part is that goeth down to the battle, so shall his part be that tarrieth by the stuff. They shall part alike. And it was so from that day forward that he made it a statute and an ordinance for Israel unto this day. And so what a concept to stifle out any greed along the way or selfishness. So we see letter A, the soldiers of Israel, then letter B, the leaders of Judah. The leaders of Judah. So do you see the green arrow where the Amalekites originally gone through and through all these different cities? David is now going to take the spoil that he gathered from the Amalekites that they stole from all these other cities and return them. Because he wants the people of Judah to share and share alike, to get what was belonging to them. Because it belonged to them, the Amalekites took it, so he's going to return it. So look at verse 26. And when David came to Ziklag, he sent of the spoil unto the elders of Judah, even to his friends, saying, behold, a present for you of the spoil of the enemies of the Lord. To them which were in Bethel, to them which were in South Ramoth, and to them which were in Jatir, and to them which were in, I should have looked up the pronunciation of these names, Ar-or-ur, and to them which were in Shipmoth, and to them which were in Eshtemoa, and to them which were in Raquel, and to them which were in the cities of the Jerahmeelites, to them which were in the cities of the Kenites, and to them which were in the Hormah, and to them which were in the Korashan, and to them which were in Atak, and to them which were in Hebron, and to all the places where David himself and his men were wont to haunt. So again, he has the mentality, share and share alike. And so he's not only returning them, but also giving to everybody a little bit of the spoil. All right, so we see double A, David's vengeance. Now we see letter double B, Philistines' victory. The Philistines' victory. Now we're going to come off the south and we're going to go up north on the map there, if we could. Zoom up to the upward side there. And so the attention here in chapter 31 is going to turn away from David, and now it's going to get to the battle between the Philistines and the Israelites, or King Saul, which is who we're actually studying. So up there on the left-hand side, you see the big giant arrows, where the red arrow, where the Philistines are going to gather and go in different places. They're going to be going to one town, another town, defeating that town, and they're going to be occupying the towns, much like what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. And notice up there where Mount Gilboa is, just to the right of that is a little place called Bethshan. That's going to come into play here. And notice all the small arrows, the gray arrows, going every which way. Because when the Philistines start winning, the Israelites start running. And that's what all those arrows mean. Now, this is an interesting story. And if you get grossed out by some bloodshed and goriness, kind of close your ears because this is get pretty detailed here. But number one, we see the method. The method. So the Philistines, sometimes they lose, sometimes they win. In chapter 31, verse 1, now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. And you see that there on that map as well. The Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons. The Philistines slew, it's going to mention most of Saul's sons, not all of them. It's going to mention Jonathan, Abinadab, Melchishua, Saul's sons. So Saul is going to die and 3 of his sons. The battle went sore against Saul. The archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul is wounded by arrows, but he kills himself to make sure that he is not tortured or made to be kept alive while his sons are tortured in front of him. He says, I'm not going to allow that to happen. Verse 6, so Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. Now, if you read that quickly without emotion, it's just facts. But imagine the loss of Israel at this time, the loss of all the wives, the loss of the nation of Israel, losing the princes, but losing the king. I mean, this was a huge event, emotionally distraught for the nation of Israel. Keep in mind, David is way down south. So, number 2, the mutilation. The mutilation. Now, after the battle's over, even during some of our nation's history, Civil War era, you wouldn't really know who was dead, who was still alive, until after the smoke had cleared, until the next day, and you're going through, try to pickpocket and get all the spoils and things off the soldiers and such, and then you find out who is alive and who's dead, which general is there, what have you. So they are going to come across King Saul. They're going to find out that he's dead, and what they do to his body and head. They're going to do 2 different things, one to the body and one to the head. Look at verse 7. And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. All right, so a lot of the Israelite cities are now deserted, and the Philistines are coming in and occupying them. Verse 8. It came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head. They stripped off his armor. They sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it or to parade it in the house of their idols and among the people. This was a bragging moment for the Philistines, to have not only the head, but to have the armor of King Saul. The armor that he offered King David, who wasn't king at that time, to fight against Goliath. That armor that belonged to the king, they have that, they have the head, and they're publishing it, parading it among the Philistines. They won the victory. Look at verse 10. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth. They fastened his body to the wall of Bethshan. So you see Bethshan right by where Mount Gilboa is. So they take the head one place, but they take his body and fasten it to the wall on display. In mockery, ridicule, desecration maybe, just kind of mocking it, but to display it certainly, and it's there. Now, before we read the next couple of verses and we finish out this study, go with me in your mind way, way back to when King Saul was first king. Do you remember the story? One of the first stories that King Saul happened was that there was a group of army people that came up, the Ammonites, and they came and picked on a little town called Jabesh Gilead. And they said, we're going to kill you. And they said, no, we'll surrender to you and we'll be slaves to you. And the Ammonites said, under one condition, we cut out your right eyes. Do you remember that story? And then the Jabesh Gileadites asked the Ammonites, can time out. Can we have 7 days to ask for help? And the Ammonites gave it to them. So word gets out to King Saul, who was just anointed, and King Saul gets mad. He says, how dare these bullies come and threaten the Jabesh Gileadites? So he pulled together resources, really under threatening them a little bit, and said, let's come together and defeat the Ammonites and save the Jabesh Gileadites. And that's exactly one of the first order businesses that King Saul did. So the Jabesh Gileadites all these years have felt indebted to King Saul. So now that King Saul is dead, watch the honor that these Jabesh Gileadites give. So number 3 in your notes, the mission. We'll read this, and we'll be done. Verse 11, and when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night, took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Bethshan, came to Jabesh and burnt them there, and they took their bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh and fasted 7 days. So they truly wanted to honor him by certainly not allowing the Philistines to humiliate him on the wall, he and his sons' bodies. And so King Saul is dead. I hope this has been a help to us as we look at the story of King Saul. We'll get to King David starting next week. We're going to start through 2 Samuel. I already have, like I said, 6 pages of typed out notes to give us, so we're set for King David. And I hope that as we look at King Saul as well as King David, it'll help us as we read the Psalms to make a little bit more sense of the meaning behind it, the emotion behind it, and praise the Lord that we can come to a God that keeps his word and that is always there to help provide comfort. We'll see that at the beginning of 2 Samuel next week. Father God,